Hey, work from homers, Adam Schroeder here. We love bringing you this podcast, and thousands of you have proven that it's been helpful for you. But since time and online storage space aren't free, Naresh and I wanted to come to you personally to ask for your financial support through Patreon. Go to patreon.com/workfromhomeshow and help support the show. And we appreciate your support at any amount you choose. That's patreon.com/workfromhomeshow. Thanks for your support. Let's get to the show.
Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa with Adam Schroeder. Today we have Dr. Stephen Phillips and Dana Parish with us. Dr. Phillips is an internationally renowned physician specializing in complex chronic diseases. If you know me by now, you know how much I like the bringing on physicians and doctors onto our show. I've learned a lot. Our listeners have learned a lot. They've been great. And Dana Parish is a chart-topping Sony ATV singer-songwriter, including the song Not My Problem from her debut album, Uncrushed, charted at number 23 on Billboard, and also the song Let It Go By, which reached the top 10. They're both co-authors of the new book, Chronic, The Hidden Cause of the Autoimmune Pandemic, and How to Get Healthy Again. So without further ado, Dr. Stephen Phillips and Dana Parish, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Phillips, let's start with you, and let's talk a little bit about global pandemics that the media and medical experts don't hype. These are pandemics like diabetes. I guess you can call them figurative pandemics, but they're like diabetes, obesity, autoimmune disease, chronic illness. Why is it that the media and the medical experts don't talk about these enough? And, the one big pandemic that we get, over the last 100 years just completely takes over everyone's lives.
Yeah, right. It's a good question. I think it's a matter of velocity. These chronic illness and autoimmune pandemics have been slowly exploding over the last 30 years. And occasionally journalists would take notice, but it never captured the attention like this rapidly exploding COVID pandemic. And the thing of it is, the irony is that now COVID is producing chronic illness because 1/3 of the COVID patients are coming down with long-term symptoms. And so it's its own chronic illness pandemic in a way.
How did y'all get connected on this? I mean, y'all's backgrounds don't seem to, merge into one book. So how did y'all get connected for this?
Yeah, no, I mean, Dr. Phillips saved my life. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is that I actually was at the height of my music career, and in the summer of 2014, I was just on the heels of a new deal with Sony. The Celine record had just come out. I was about to make an album with Idina Menzel, and boom, I got a tick bite. Had no idea the implications. I came home, I saw the bite and a rash. I was in the lucky minority that saw it and got treatment right away within 5 days of the bite with 3 weeks of antibiotics. And the doctor said, don't worry about it. Just go on with your life. Everything will be fine. And 3 months later, I woke up and I had extreme swelling in my breast and breast pain. From there, I went on to have incredible weakness, fatigue, anxiety, depression, fibromyalgia symptoms, because I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Basically, everything that could go wrong went wrong. And I was going to doctor after doctor, all the quote, top New York City doctors, and they all said it could not be related to the tick bite. I kept asking. And they said, you were treated early. It's always cured with the 3 weeks of antibiotics you were given. Don't worry about it. And it's something else. Well, I knew that was not true because, I know my body, and I knew that everything changed after that tick bite. I kept asking the doctors, the infectious disease doctors, are there other infections that ticks can spread that you could test me for? No. So again, like that, in retrospect, it's unbelievable, actually, since there are so many infections that tick spread that they could have looked for and should have looked for, but they didn't. So by December, after my initial symptoms started, I was in heart failure. And I think the doctors generally were, kind of thinking that I was in my head. I was, I don't know that they thought I was making it up, but they thought a lot of it probably was psychosomatic, which is crazy because I never had any history of making up fake symptoms. And who would do that in the height of their music career? It's insane. And so anyway, when I got into heart failure, thankfully somebody sent me to Dr. Phillips, who recognized what was going on, did test me for the other infections, did find another one. Not only was my Lyme continuing, which happens so often. There's so much controversy around this chronic Lyme situation, but that is a whole different story. But I was persuaded by the fact that the doctors said, couldn't be possible. So I thought, oh my gosh, what could be something else? Who knows? But Dr. Phillips treated my undertreated Lyme and found another infection called Bartonella that was very serious as well and very common as well. And I got completely better, and I never needed or took any of the meds that I was going to be put on, probably for many, many years, if not forever. So I'm really, really pleased to tell you I'm not taking anything anymore, and all my symptoms went away, including all my psych symptoms.
Dana, your story, one thing that frustrates me is that you went to so many medical professionals, physicians, and they weren't able to diagnose you. So Dr. Phillips, why is the medical community so ignorant of, to me, it seems like basic issues, but I guess these are more complex issues. Why are they so ignorant of these issues?
Well, I think it's a complex question, like deep-rooted in psychology, basically. But Dana's story was very simple. I mean, she had a tick bite with a rash, erythema migrans, a Lyme rash. It was so obvious. I always say my plumber could have diagnosed Dana's Lyme because it was like right in your face. The fact that 12 top doctors kind of didn't, it speaks to what's really, really broken about the system in general. And in terms of, more complex issues, which aren't as in your face, they can be easily missed. And I think that it's about medical dogma more than anything, because we're trained to diagnose the cause of acute illness and only suppress the symptoms of chronic illness. I went through a similar kind of a story. I had, in 2010, I was sleeping in my bed. I got spider bites. And 2 months after the spider bites, which I at the time thought nothing of because we're not trained that spider bites will give you any disease. But my body exploded with arthritis everywhere. And within 6 months, I couldn't walk at all. And I gave up my practice. I got, went to 25 doctors, including 3 rheumatologists. And my diagnoses were rheumatoid arthritis and a type of arthritis of my spine called spondylitis. And they wanted to give me immune suppressants the rest of my life. And I didn't take them because they didn't make sense to me. And I would kind of argue with them a bit, just saying, what's causing it? And they would say, well, one said, we as rheumatologists don't focus on cause, we focus on effect. And if we can suppress your symptoms for the rest of your life, then we call that a cure. And I'm like, well, let's call it symptom suppression, not a cure. And I ended up figuring it all out in the last minute and finding an infection and treating it. And really, I'm great. And I'm much better than the patients that I see that come into me with diagnoses of different autoimmune conditions when they are on immune suppressants for a long time. I'm doing much, much better than them. And I have to say that medical science changes extremely slowly. They've done studies on it. It's like 50 years is the timeline at which new concepts are adopted.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's way too believable at 50 years. But one of the things that really stood out to me in Dana's story is the fact that, she was telling them what was wrong, and it was just kind of being dismissed because, obviously she wasn't the quote-unquote medical professional in this case. How do we advocate for ourselves better in that situation? Because, like she was saying, she knew her body. She knew there was something wrong. It wasn't in her head. Kind of, how do we advocate for ourselves better with the way the system's set up these days?
I tell patients that you really are in control. I mean, it's not like the doctor's up on the pedestal and patients are on the floor or something. It's, as like I say, I know how stressed out doctors are with seeing lots of patients and having lots of responsibilities. I know how horrible it is to be a chronically ill patient facing a lifetime of disability. I can tell you for sure being a patient is worse. So I would definitely side with the patient every time. And I think that you have to find a doctor that's respectful, inquisitive, and wants to go down the rabbit holes with you, figuring this puzzle out, rather than just slap a label on you and move on. Because the training really is to suppress chronic symptoms. And I've had patients come to me on, no exaggeration, in excess of 20 not just immune, but symptom suppressing drugs, including immune suppressants, plus many, many others, sleep medicines, psychiatric medicines, pain medicines. And, I look at this, we call it polypharmacy in medical terms. And I think about the doctors prescribing them. I know that these patients go to multiple doctors, and that's why they get 6 from this doctor and 6 from this doctor and 6 from this doctor. But I always think of the same thing, like, how do these doctors not think that this is inherently wrong, that this person has to live, his or her life on 20 medicines? That isn't anyone looking at the cause. It's very like
they probably can't afford.
Yeah, that too. I mean, it's an enormous burden on the patients personally, and then the healthcare system in general.
As far as how you're changing the current model of simply treating the symptoms, you touched a little bit about how the industry is. They usually use, I think, dangerous drugs. They try to hook people on these pharmaceuticals for life. I even had a doctor who tried to hook me on some pharmaceuticals that were completely unnecessary. How is your style? How is your model different?
Well, I mean, the medicines that I use, I use antibiotics, antimicrobials, and supplements like herbals in usually short duration kind of treatment cycles. And I limit the antibiotics to a certain few to keep the microbiome, intact. We don't use high risk antibiotics. We use there's a lot of misconceptions. People think that antibiotics are all created equal, and some have a big effect on the microbiome and some have a small effect on the microbiome. So we only use like the lower risk of the antibiotics. And there are many medicines that are prescription that are not thought of as antibiotics because they're not, and they have effect against many bacteria. And we use those. And then we use some, like I said, some of these herbals like oil of oregano. And the patient outcomes, we have about 95+% patients respond really well to therapy, and most of them get well and get off antibiotics and antimicrobials permanently. That's the experience I've had since 1996. And the current paradigm is to just suppress the symptoms forever. So I don't think that a month of antimicrobial therapy has really good outcomes, but I do think that cycles of treatment spaced out over time, it usually takes people about between a year and a half of time, but about half that amount in treatment, because I have patients go on and off therapy for people to get well. Like in Dana's case, I think I added up the total, treatment duration was like 7 months, and the total duration was like, I don't know, Dana, what was it, like a year and a half or a year and a quarter? I'm not really sure what the total time was.
So Dana, how did you find, in your experience going through this, what were some of the ways that you found were best to educate yourself on your situation to feel like you knew enough going into the meetings with the doctors, whether it was, with Dr. Phillips or anybody else? Kind of what helped you best in educating yourself?
Can you believe that the thing that helped me the most was finally having the good sense to Google all of my symptoms in December when I went into heart failure? So this is crazy. One of the things that really bothers me when I look back on it is that all the doctors dissuaded me not only from Googling my symptoms. The first doctor that diagnosed my Lyme in the urgent care said, and don't Google Lyme. You're going to be fine. You caught it early. You're not going to turn into one of those crazy Lyme people. And I thought, what the hell is a crazy Lyme person? I've never heard of such a thing. And, I did not know that an infectious disease that is so common and so dangerous and so insidious could possibly be so political. It just never even occurred to me. So in December, when I went into heart failure, I Googled all of my symptoms. Finally, I had 37 out of 60 on a Lyme checklist that a physician made. And I was so outraged that I had been denied and dismissed for the last several months, to the point where I was at death's door. Like, I couldn't believe it. And that's when I started putting out the word to some close friends about needing a Lyme doctor. My friends had a house in New England and were well connected and said, this is the doctor that I would see if I got Lyme or my kids got Lyme. He sent me to Dr. Phillips and said he was brilliant. And I knew immediately, like when I met him, I could finally just relax and actually listen to what he said and do what he suggested and get better. Like I really did know that he was going to get me to where I am. I just knew it in my heart, just like I knew in my heart that all the other doctors were completely clueless.
Dana, you're just getting me so frustrated because I feel your pain.
Yeah.
I feel your pain, and I've had issues with doctors. Fortunately, I haven't had serious issues, but even the small issues that I've had, different surgeries, it just boggles me because I've been taught growing up. I went, my parents tried to give me the best education possible. I went to some reputable schools, and it was kind of instilled in me, no matter what I do, regardless of whether I work on Wall Street, become a doctor, whatever it is, I should try to excel at it and become an expert at it. And just because I'm done with school, business school, or in the case of doctors, medical school or residency or fellowship, doesn't mean the learning stops there. And it annoys me because I hear look, I'm married to a physician, an internist, like you, Dr. Phillips. And I'd say at least half of my network is physician-based. Yeah. And it just annoys me so much when I hear doctors saying, Google is the enemy. And I have patients coming in with these outlines that they got from Google, and they think that they know more than me. And I'm one of those people. And I've actually been complimented because of it. I'll have doctors ask me, are you a doctor? How do you know all this stuff?
Me too.
Said, Google. But at the same time, many of them are like putting down Google, putting down what's there and saying, I have the MD. I've got the experience. It's my word. It's my way. Everything else is false. And that's what really irks me, because I've seen so many misdiagnoses. I've seen so many unnecessary pills, poisonous pills that have been recommended, unnecessary procedures and surgeries. And to me, I think it's just an ego thing. I think a lot of the MDs have gotten egocentric, and they've done what they've done with their schooling, and they make a lot of money, and it's my way or the highway.
That's right. And they think they know everything. And actually, a lot of the learning absolutely stops when they leave medical school. I don't see any curiosity in the general medical community. I don't see a lot of investigative, work. I don't see a lot of medical detectives. I mean, those are the doctors that I like. And those are that's how Dr. Phillips is. He's going to find, even if it's not an infection, he's going to come up with the answer to your problem more often than any other doctor I've ever met, because he's so curious, he's so knowledgeable, and he's such a great listener. And he actually recognizes and sees what's in front of him. What amazes me is how many of the doctors I hear from these patients similar to me all the time. And a lot of them, the ones from New York, have gone to the same doctors. They didn't put together that like 10 of us came in, within a 2 or 3 year span with the same symptoms after a tick bite. They didn't ever put together that like, maybe there's a pattern here. It blows me away, but they're not taught, so they don't know. And that's the end of the story. That's my experience. It's really enraging, as you know.
Yeah. And the other problem is, you said they think they know everything. I like it when my doctor comes in and they're able to explain things and when they know their stuff. That I like it. What I don't like is when they come in and sometimes they start asking me, well, what do you think? What do you think I should do? And I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I mean, you should know this. Just come in. I feel so much more comfortable when a confident doctor comes in and says, okay, this is what you have. I've seen this a million times. This is what I'm going to put you on. But many times they can't even do that. And when I see any sign of hesitancy, then I get nervous. And I'm like, are they confident about this? Like, maybe I should get a second opinion.
Well,
I would be careful about the doctors that are overconfident, though, truly, because there's I always think that if you ever want humility, look back at medical textbooks from the 50s. They thought they knew everything back then. They had like 2 blood tests. So I know a lot of confident doctors who are idiots. So just be careful about false confidence. I think We should question everything as we go along and be hypervigilant and double check and all the things that we want. We're dealing with people's lives, so there is no wiggle room for being like super confident going the wrong direction 5 miles and having to turn around. I agree that there are big problems with how doctors are, in the medical system currently. Before med school, I went to a business program, and it was all about a way to think, like a logical way to think nimbly. And then when I went to med school, I thought it would be something similar, and it was all about memorization and rote. So it's kind of the way that we're trained as doctors doesn't lead toward the rapid assimilation of new information. It leads toward this very dogmatic, concrete way of thinking. And I think that's part of the problem.
Now, you're talking about the whole autoimmune thing and the immune system and the prevalence that it's, all of these diseases are becoming. Like, it amazes me looking, talking with my friends who have kids and, seeing the community out there, like how many immune issues are coming up with people that seem to either not have existed or not been nearly as prevalent, when I was growing up, for example, like all of the gluten intolerances and all the peanut allergies that are out there and just all of the issues that are going on. What are we doing to ourselves, or what are we doing to our environment that's making all of this stuff seem to become so prevalent?
Right. The book focuses on the germ side of the equation, and it touches on the other side of the equation, but the other side of the equation is just as important, and it's the toxic environment that we're living in. I mean, I wouldn't point toward anyone, whether it's a lot of pesticides and herbicides, or whether it's other stuff in our overly processed diets or contaminants in the many medications that we take, or air pollution and global warming and allowing diseases to spread via global warming to parts of the world where they didn't get as readily before. But some combination thereof is contributing to this precipitous rise in chronic and autoimmune illness. I think that treating the infections are one part of the equation, but kind of letting the body heal by getting rid of the garbage that we're exposed to is the other very, very important part.
Just not easy.
Not easy at all.
Yeah.
Let's talk really quickly, Dr. Phillips, about the SARS-CoV-2, these variants. What's your advice and what solutions do you have to people who've already gotten the COVID-19 or any of the variants, and also people who haven't gotten it? Of course, you have the mainstream stuff, the face masks, you have the social distancing.
Right.
We had a guest on who changed my lifestyle. He recommended vitamin intake, vitamins A through D, zinc, magnesium, a few others. Exercising every day, getting natural sunlight, fresh air, all those things. What are your recommendations, like I said, for people who've gotten the virus and also people who haven't gotten it yet?
Right. So I concur with those recommendations. I think, vitamin D, I would say this, if there was a drug company that had a drug that worked as well for COVID as vitamin D, it'll be a big hit, because vitamin D deficiency is associated with a 4 times increase in mortality with COVID. They did a study where they split up groups, and they gave one group vitamin D, one group no vitamin D, and there were deaths in the no vitamin D group, no deaths in the vitamin D group, but also the vitamin D group had 25 times lower rate of ICU care than the non-vitamin D group. And vitamin D is tricky because you got to keep the levels pretty much in a great, range. You don't want to take too much either. And the optimum range is around 55, 60. But for my COVID patients, I've offered them early treatment options that some of them are prescriptions and some of them are over the counter. I can go over a few of them. But I have to tell you, they've all done very well. None of my patients have progressed to even requiring hospitalization. And by definition, all my patients that I see, I don't do general medicine. So all my patients have an underlying condition, and many of them have traditional high risk factors. Many of them are obese, have high blood pressure, hypertension, et cetera. And they've not only done well, and none of them have required, significant care. None have developed long COVID, and they're not doing studies on these early interventions to see if they reduce the onset of long COVID. But from what I'm hearing from other doctors that do the same, they're also not seeing long COVID. So what I use now is I offer patients a combination of doxycycline, which is a common antibiotic that's been shown to have activity in cell cultures and in clinical studies in humans against COVID, even though it's an antibiotic. I use the drug ivermectin, which is an antiparasitic. It's really safe. It's been around forever. And it's very inexpensive. And there's, I think, 21 randomized controlled trials at this point. showing that ivermectin is helpful. The WHO, sorry, I have these really small ear canals. The earpiece keeps falling out. The WHO did a meta-analysis of 13 randomized controlled trials and found that they sponsored this meta-analysis through University of Liverpool, and they found that ivermectin reduced mortality by over 80%. And randomized controlled trials are kind of like the holy grail in medical design, medical study design, and it's not really being announced much here. So this is a useful drug. It's got an excellent safety profile. Many billions of doses have been prescribed over the years, and no one really hears much about it. And that's the backbone of what I've been giving people. But in addition to that, I give them vitamin D. A lot of the patients, we have their vitamin D levels on record, so we know how much vitamin D to give them. But we titrate the vitamin D according to what the levels were, previously. We give them zinc, we give them quercetin and bromelain and vitamin C, also melatonin, a supplement called NAC, N-acetylcysteine, and glutathione. And the last four are designed to suppress a protein in the body that contributes to cytokine storm. So in these very high-risk patients, the scariest part is that they would develop some cytokine storm. And this stuff in combination has worked really well.
I'm just curious to hear your thoughts, because whenever I see somebody talk about ivermectin on YouTube or on Facebook, it's banned. It's like the video's taken down or it's flagged as false. Has this happened to you? And what are your thoughts on this censorship of, I don't want to say science, but censorship of scientific ideas? Medical ideas.
I think it's disgraceful because we're supposed to have a free society, and these are, a lot of these. I've seen medical conferences banned. I've seen data presented from medical journals, like highly respected peer-reviewed medical journals on ivermectin. I've seen that banned, and I think it's a horror show. I mean, I'm so disgusted by what's going on. I can't even tell you how enraged I am about this, but. It's not just because of the basic, the freedoms that it's imposing on, the fact that it's harming people, that people have, number one, we should have free access to this information. Number two, the denial of this information is harming people. And what basis do they have the right to deny the access to information that's really it's legitimate medical information? So I think it's horrible.
Dr. Phillips and Dana, is there anything else you think our listeners need to know about this topic that we've been discussing? I think we've covered a whole lot today, but is there anything that we haven't asked you that you feel our listeners need to know?
I mean, never underestimate the destruction that an unrecognized or even recognized infection can do head to toe. And never underestimate the fact that a lot of infections are actually persistent and chronic when you are told that they are gone, because no longer can it be found in your in a nasal swab or in your throat or in your saliva. The way that these pathogens survive is they move into tissues sometimes, and that's what can cause some persistent symptoms. And we see it in the brain, we see it in the heart, like in my case, and both the brain and the heart. And I think there's just a lot of I jumped to this conclusion about post-infectious, post-viral, post-Lyme, and it's completely untrue. And actually, it completely prevented me from getting care, that phrase. And we're seeing it now with COVID long haulers. We're really upset and concerned about it. So I would just caution your listeners who are suffering to not let doctors put you in that box until infections are thoroughly evaluated and ruled out. Again, there's a lot of data about this. I'm not just it's not my assumption. There's tons of data. We referenced it in our book, and a quick Google search will pull up a lot of this stuff, which doctors are generally unwilling to do and unfamiliar with, and yet you can find it and save your own life.
All right, Dana, I wanted to ask you: is your music career kicking back up? Are you going to kind of get back into it, and how's that going?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still signed to Sony, and I still will do. I'll still do things. Right now, the music business is pretty much shut down, so
Yeah.
I'm still doing a lot of music searches and stuff like that. Means I get a lot of calls for film and TV. By the way, these productions, as you guys probably know, like keep opening and shutting, and so I'm still somewhat engaged. But just given that I can't really get into the studio with people, it's just not what it was. But it's you know what? It actually kind of worked out because there's no way I could possibly promote this book and finish this book and done all this work with Dr. Phillips if I was going at full steam with it. So it's under terrible circumstances, but it's still okay. But yeah, I will hopefully get back to it when the time is right.
Well, Dr. Phillips and Dana Parish, thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, their book, Chronic, The Hidden Cause of the Autoimmune Pandemic and How to Get Healthy Again. You can check them out at www.stephenphillipsmd.com. That's Stephen, Steven, phillipsmd.com, or at danaparish.com. That's DANAPARISH.com. That'll be in the show notes as well. Go and check out their websites, check out their books, see everything they have to offer. I wanted to thank you once again for your time and your insights today. All of our listeners, check us out, workfromhomeshow.com. That's workfromhomeshow.com. If you have any questions, comments, anybody you think we need to speak with, give us an email, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com. And until next week, keep on working from home.